Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Soul Spark Reaction channel. I'm Ravi. This is Matt. Today, we are reviewing Jordan B. Peterson's A Harmless Man is Not a Good Man, something I'm very interested in hearing because I think Jordan Peterson is one of the great thinkers of the
Modern age.
modern age, the 21st century, for sure. He's taught me a lot already, but I haven't seen this one. Ready?
Hmm.
Okay.
Hello, welcome to another episode of After School. I'm Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Today, we'll be summoning our inner monsters. Without further ado, let's dive in. You might say that someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect, because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel.
I watched Joe Rogan say this in a very different way. He said it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. It means prepare yourself for the worst and also develop restraint so you don't abuse this power. All right, that's the advantage of the shadow self, which I know we've both developed and tried to integrate. And by the way, it's difficult once you unleash that side of you that's very dark. You have to also put reins on them, and that's a difficult process. So I'm
I,
100% on board with what he's saying so far.
so I think that he's talking about the shadow, the monster within you, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can develop it without hardship, though. Like, it doesn't have to be hardship compared to other people and who has the most hardship. It has to be hardship for yourself internally.
I see. Yeah.
And you almost become that which you don't like, and then you realize, I don't want to be this bad or this cruel, and you have to pull yourself back. But you have to go past your boundaries of what you feel comfortable with when it comes to being that monster.
You have to cross boundaries in order to realize there was a boundary back there, because else, how else would you
Yeah,
know unless you crossed
but
it?
some people cross and they don't ever pull back, and that's not development either. That's the opposite.
Right. That's just being the devil.
Sort of. I
Yeah.
think the devil's more cunning than savage.
Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off.
So, so it's just interesting when he's talking about when you learn to fight the martial arts. I'm saying it from my own personal experience. I've gone through that darkness where I didn't have the confidence to fight in the martial arts sense. I just anger, rage, to protect myself growing up. And later on in life, I learned some martial arts very briefly. Not gonna get in any cage and win a UFC title, sadly. I learned martial arts, and then I got into a fight after knowing a little bit of martial arts. And the fights before were filled with adrenaline, almost animalistic fighting. Right. Now with martial arts, it almost seemed like the whole fight was in slow motion. There's a fight that had to happen, but it was totally different than when I was younger. It was controlled. It was less savage.
So the martial arts helped you control that side of you that had already come out.
Yeah, but it almost felt like the Matrix. It's like everything moves slow. It's like you kind of already knew what the person was gonna do
Well,
and
that's called
when.
training, basically,
Yeah,
right?
I guess, but it calms you because you're not having to rely on pure aggression, so to speak, pure
And
raw.
adrenaline.
Basically, you get into a fight, and anybody that's been to a fight will probably equate this that you kind of just channel everything in you to win that fight at that moment when you don't have any experience. Now there was none of that channeling. It's just, okay, I have to do this. I have to protect myself. All right, I don't really want to do this. There was no adrenaline to it. No adrenaline. Anyway, let's go.
And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, of the sorts of terrible atrocities that characterized, let's say, the 20th century. And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study.
What he's saying there is by understanding your shadow, you can understand why people are capable of committing certain atrocities because it's just a part of human nature. And for some people, they've just hidden it away in some room in their unconscious. It's there. But what I just don't like when people pretend that they just don't have it and they pretend to be Christ-like. I think there's a saying, the most dangerous person in the world is a saint that thinks he's a saint. You know, something like that. You think you're a saint, you're going to do everything you can to say I'm good and this is bad.
Which, well, you're not supposed to do in Christianity. You're not supposed to judge, but we know that a lot of
Yeah,
Christians do.
a lot of people want to be saints
Yeah.
and virtue signal.
The Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims. Let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also
Right.
partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom. But it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. And everyone has there's this old
That takes
story in
courage.
King Arthur where the knights go off to look for the Holy Grail, which is either the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper or the cup into which the blood that gushed from his side was poured when he was crucified. The stories vary, but it's basically a holy object like the phoenix in some sense that's a representation of transformation. So it's an ideal. And so King Arthur's knights, who sit at a round table because they're all roughly equal, go off to find the most valuable thing. And where do you look for the most valuable thing when you don't know where it is? Well, each of the knights looks at the forest surrounding the castle and enters the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's a good thing to understand, because the gateway to wisdom and the gateway to the development of personality, which is exactly the same thing, is precisely through the portal that you do not want to climb through.
You know, that reminds me of a dream that I had years back. I was looking down this dark tunnel and I had this sense of terror. And well, you know this about me, but it goes subconscious. It's part of my subconscious. I felt afraid and I said, I gotta run in there. Only because I knew it was something in there that I thought was scary. And I ran in there and nothing happened. And when I woke up, I'm like, oh, this was something deeper than this was almost like a test to see if you have the courage to go into darkness, let's say. It was something deeper than that. That's what that reminded me of.
It is kind of, it's like leaning in two different ways now, because at first he's talking about the monster within you, which is also the shadow. But the shadow comes in different forms than just this scary monster that does bad things.
Sure.
And as I'm listening to this video, I've already dealt with the monster side of myself. I think all of us as teenagers at one time will have this monster develop. And teenage years, I think, is when it manifests, so to speak, more than anywhere else. It's because hormones, you don't have control over yourself. You're wild, you're young. But the shadow itself, it's like there's constant development. If you're not seeing a new shadow in yourself, you're probably not really fully developed. Because every time you think that you're like, all right, I got life figured out, I know all about the dark side of me, I'm balanced now, there will be a new thing will appear years down the road even, but it's always going to be something that you have to constantly develop. You'll never be fully developed, I feel.
When you're right that the shadow isn't just the monster, it's the quality. I think it's defined as the qualities that society has determined are bad, so we hide it, and the qualities that society has determined are good, we embellish those. And by hiding those other qualities, like, I don't know, smoking or something like that, even if it's helpful to you, you create an even bigger monster.
I would say that when you get past the point of even just society, these things, there comes a point where you've worked on yourself enough that you don't really care about what society thinks of you. Yeah. There are some people that don't care, and they go against society on purpose to do like the mirror opposite. Oh, I'm going to get all these piercings and tattoos just to go against the norm, but they're still in the norm by going against the norm.
Right. They're in that same.
They're just trying to be the opposite. It's just like, but there comes a point where society doesn't matter anymore to you. And what's going to happen when society doesn't matter anymore to you is things are going to matter for your own personal growth. So you still got to be working your own personal shadow within yourself. Like, you're not doing it for society anymore. You're just doing it for this quality within yourself that you don't like. Maybe I feel like I need to procrastinate less. So the shadow in that case is something very simple as procrastination, laziness. In yourself. Nobody in society is saying this. Maybe you're like the hardest worker in the world to everyone else in society. You're a rich billionaire, but you don't feel that. So it's always a shadow within you. And just from a purely physical standpoint, go in front of a light. You always have the shadow following you. It's just like life.
And the reason for that's actually quite technical. This is a Jungian presupposition too, is that, well, there's a bunch of things about you that are underdeveloped, and a lot of those things are because there's things you've avoided looking at because you don't want to look at them, and there's parts of you you've avoided developing because it's hard for you to develop those parts. And so it's by virtual necessity that what you need is where you don't want to look, because that's where you've kept it. And so when you see these stories of the hero, journeying to unknown lands of terror and danger, that's what happens to you. It happens to you all the time. You're in this little safe space like the Hobbit in the Shire, and then there's a great evil brewing somewhere, and you can no longer ignore it, so off you go into the land of terror and uncertainty. And better to go on purpose than accidentally, that's for sure, because at least you can be prepared. And we also know that if you're going to face a threat, if you face it voluntarily, what happens is your body activates itself for exploration and mastery. But if you face it involuntarily, same size threat, then you revert to prey mode, and you're frozen, and that's way, way, way more stressful. It's way harder on your body. And so
as he's saying this, my brain's just thinking, but isn't it fun to go through the shadow then? It's like an adventure.
I would say that. You would say that. But what he's saying is there are people that actively avoid looking at parts of themselves, Look, we know people like this. There's people that actively avoid looking at parts of themselves they know they need to be looking at. And I don't mind that because I know how, he says the word, it can be traumatizing to you to know what you're really like or some of your characteristics.
I get it,
Yeah.
but I'm just playing devil's
It is fun.
I'm playing devil's advocate in the sense that you got people that want to live in a bubble, maybe just watch TV all day, watch the news, watch sports, just live in a bubble essentially. They don't go on an adventure in life, and
This is the best
life
adventure.
will eventually not exist anymore for you. Everyone has a finite time on this planet, so why not go on an adventure?
Some of the most exciting times in my life has been the inward journey because you're discovering, when you discover parts of yourself that you didn't know were there, whether they're good or bad, it might feel bad for a moment, but at least you get to know yourself. It's like going on to me, it's like going on a vacation because I got to explore something. Anyway, you should do the same thing.
It's better to keep your eye open and watch for emergent threats, because you all know, what you're not doing quite right and where your life is likely to unravel. You all have a sense of that. And the best thing to do is to not ignore that, to pay attention to it, to watch it, and to take corrective action early. And then, you stay on top of things, and your little trip to the underworld might be a few minutes long instead of a catastrophe that produces post-traumatic stress disorder, knocks you out for 4 or 5 years, and maybe you never recover. So one of the things you need to do if you're going to be a human being is to prepare yourself to be useful in the face of death. And so when you have a parent that dies, which shatters people's ideas, often they can't even think about it. If you can't even think about that, man, you've got some thinking to do, because you need to be able to at least think about that, because otherwise you're just going to be a wasteland when it happens. And you never know, you could even have a higher ambition. Maybe you could even be useful when it happens, instead of being part of the heap of destroyed people who also have to be taken care of. And that's brutal. You have to be brutal to be useful in the aftermath of your parents' death. You don't get to crumble and fall apart, and no, you have every reason to. So you got to be kind of some tough monster to manage that. But do you want to be useful in the face of tragedy, or do you want to be pathetic? Well, you make your choice.
So I only have one ending thought here, and it's, you can't call yourself brave unless you've addressed some of the harsher qualities about yourself. And taking the inward journey, let's say, look, that requires a level of courage that not everybody has. And anybody that thinks of themselves as strong but avoids telling themselves the truth about some of their shadow aspects, well, we've done other videos on this, but they're weak.
I talked about we have a finite time. He mentions it right now. After I've mentioned it, he mentions, your death of a parent's a hard thing. I think that a lot of the reason why I was able to do shadow work has to do with the fact that I've gone through, experienced a lot of death, because you have no choice once death comes. It's very hard. There's no, okay, I can hide in a bubble now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a choice. It happens. You lost somebody that's very close to you. And maybe that's why I was able to. I never even thought about to hearing it right here. It's just, I've been around a lot of death and lost people, and I guess it makes you do a lot of reflecting. Just 2 cents I got from that.
Well, that was inspiring in a sarcasm, morbid. Okay, so I think that was worth watching, and it's worth saying, and it's worth putting out there that, it's strength to face your shadow, essentially. That is what builds strength.
A good man is a very dangerous man who is under voluntary control.
Ooh, that is true.
That's
the warrior in the garden.
When you think somebody that's a good person, and you think they're soft.
They're not.
It depends on what they've gone through.
Yeah.
You have to know the person. You don't know the person until you walked in their shoes or you actually talk to them in some sort of
And
depth.
sometimes it's not who you think it is.
Yep.
All right, this was great. Like, subscribe, comment the videos you want us to watch next time.